So I'm going to be very brief. I'd like to welcome the stars for this afternoon. Lucy Kraft on my right, and Kenji, yes. And sorry, and Shigeyoshi, who...
And the professor.
Yes, and the professor. So we just got time till 4, so I won't be too long. I'll give the floor to them. I'm sure you want to ask them questions. I just thought the film was wonderful, Lucy. I hope it's the first step, and then you get the second and third and fourth generations also, I think, isn't it?
Do people have questions? Because if you don't, we have a spiel. We can just sort of rattle away if you don't have questions. But maybe we'll just say a few words from each person. First of all, Sekine-san, if you want to.
Hi, my name is Kenji Seiryu from United People. We distribute mainly documentary films around the world on social issues, mainly to raise awareness about many things. And I believe this film can initiate many kinds of discussion among Japanese people. And I'd like to bring this film to many universities, colleges to start a discussion. And I think this film gives a new perspective about US-Japan relationship. And I personally like this film because I was touched by like her and her mother, that she was a very humorous person too. But anyway, ex-enemies can fall in love in such a way, and it gives hope that regardless of your background, people can fall in love, and it touched my heart. Thank you.
Yes, Tomi-sensei.
Hi, thank you very much. And I'm a former professor of Katsu University in Tokyo. And I'm a very great honor to have an opportunity to talk to you today. And first of all, I'd like to outline, I was given 5 minutes to talk, so make it very briefly. Anyway, I'd like to outline Japanese war brides. And Japanese war brides were the first Japanese allowed to enter the U.S. after Immigration Act of 1924, which banned immigration from Japan. And Japanese war bride can be defined as Japanese women who married to members of Allied occupation troops or U.S. armed forces and immigrated to their husbands' countries from the end of World War II through 1950s. Figures ranging from 40,000 to 50,000 have been cited estimating the number of the international marriage that had taken place between Japanese women and international marriages that had between Japanese women and American servicemen by the late 1950s. They have often been called Senso Hanayome, or war bride. In the United States, they not only struggled against such barriers as language, culture, and life environment, but also they fought against prejudice towards them from within the Japanese American community due to the stereotype of war bride as burghers or pampan, which means prostitute for foreign soldiers. Many of them do not feel comfortable with the term senso hanayome because of the stigma attached to it. Many brides were very hurt by the endless stream of negative images that were presented by Japanese media in the 1950s. Today, most of the Japanese war bride in the United States are like their mothers in the 80s. And next, I'd like to talk about bride school in Japan, which you saw right now. And Christian Women Association of Tokyo opened the first bride school in 1947, and later that American Red Cross established bride school not only metropolitan area, but also in places like Sendai, Nagoya, and Kyushu Kokura in Kyushu. 102 bright schools were established throughout Japan by the American Red Cross from 1951 to the late 1950s. Nearly 4,500 to 5,000 war brides graduated from these bright schools. The purpose of the bright schools was to give guidance to Japanese war brides so that they could assimilate into American society and culture, and they could become, good American mothers. I think it's very important to remember that establishment of bride school in Japan is a reflection of a traditional white-centered American middle-class perspective of American womanhood, and such a domestic view during the Cold War era in the 1950s, that women's sphere should be within the home, at the home. Although little more than 10% of the whole Japanese war bride in the United States attended the bride schools, they in general have adopted American culture and value as a wife of an American husband and as well as a mother of their children. They put their heart into their children's education as an American mother and supported the family as a wife. So American culture and sense of value have been fostered in their mind through a life of nearly 60 years in America. Thank you.
I'll make a few. The reason we decided to do this film was it was a few years in the making. 2011, after the earthquake, and I was back in the States visiting with Karen, and Karen and Catherine both live in Washington D.C., which is my hometown. So we were at Starbucks or something, and they mentioned that they were thinking about doing this project on their mothers, and I said, well, I want in on it too, even though my mother is not a traditional. Is this okay? It's not on? Okay. She's not a traditional war bride. She married someone who was out of uniform by that time. And one of the reasons I was motivated to do this is if you Google Japanese war bride, there's very little information. It's kind of overwhelmed by discussions of the Japanese who were sent to the internment camps. And this is a valid subject of history, and particularly now, we should not forget that this happened. But this isn't the only part of Japanese American history. And so I felt that our mothers were getting short shrift. And I also felt that they were still being stigmatized. Professor Yasutomi mentioned that they were looked down upon. I mean, basically, war bride to this community means prostitute. I mean, it's the same thing for many members of the Japanese American community. And if you say, well, this is 70 years ago, I can tell you when we were raising the money for this project on Kickstarter, there was a group of people in San Francisco who raised their hands and said, we don't want to have anything to do with those women. They are fallen women. So these stigmas are still alive and well in some parts of the Japanese American community, unfortunately. So sort of to redeem the good name of my mother, and also to find out what happened. This is coinciding with a similar effort by younger Japanese women scholars. Professor Yasutomi obviously is a man, but he's been very involved in this. But sort of belatedly, there's been an effort to look at the post-war period through a different prism, i.e. that of ordinary people, not just the generals and the politicians, but how it was lived by ordinary people on the ground and, God forbid, housewives. I mean, who would have ever thought that housewives would be worthy of anybody's study? Well, there is a wealth of information that we can learn about, and it gives much more nuance and richness to the U.S.-Japan relationship if you look at it from the perspective of these women. Among them, I think you probably got a sense from the War Bride School, is our identity as Americans in the 1950s. I mean, we really thought that we brought civilization to the barbarians, even though Japanese women had a suffragettes movement prior to World War II. There were plenty of intellectual, well-educated Japanese women, not the majority, of course. It was a tiny percentage. But MacArthur wasn't the first person to utter equal rights for women and men. It's something that should happen in this country. I mean, it really was this sort of messianic zeal that was brought to the effort of civilizing the Japanese, as if there had been no civilization there before. Another thing that was fascinating to me is, this idea that we Americans, and I include myself in this, we Americans were liberating the Japanese. Of course, I was born a few years after that. From this feudalistic, very restricted culture where, it was barbaric, et cetera, et cetera. What were we liberating them for? Well, as you could see, the American conception in those days is the ideal place for a woman in those days is right back in the kitchen. What were they teaching them in bride school? They weren't teaching them how to enroll at Harvard. They were teaching them how to frost a cake or make hospital corners on their beds. So this was a great personal disappointment for my mother. She was very well educated. She was among that 2% of Japanese women who were educated. And she bought into this idea of MacArthur as, the Americans brought us equal rights, and she worked for a few jobs in Japan, right around here in Hibiya Park, actually. My parents met over in Uchisai Waicho. And she bought into this idea. She said, well, in Japan, I'm still being treated as a tea lady. I'll go to the Holy Land. I'll go to America where they actually they believe in this stuff. And she gets over there, and Dad says to her, I don't care what you do all day long, as long as dinner's on the table at 5. So, and this was really the expectation in the 1950s. This is the role of the woman, was to create, be at home and create the next generation of Cold Warriors. So sort of the gap between what we were preaching and what we actually did was quite amazing to me. And there's a lot of other stuff going on here, and we could only touch on it very superficially in this 26-minute film. I was kind of frothing at the bit while we were making this film. There's like so much other stuff here, but we only raised $40,000, which seems like a lot of money, but it doesn't cover very much if you're doing we had Discovery Channel level people working on this film project. So we are just starting up right now, shopping a new idea for a full 1-hour documentary that we hope to produce sometime in the very near future. At the same time that we're distributing this film in Japan and in the U.S., primarily targeting universities. But it's been an amazing ride. I can't tell you how fascinating it is, and we're learning new stuff practically every day. So it's a sort of a wonderfully refreshing look at the U.S.-Japan relations, but the origins of the U.S.-Japan relationship. Let me give you one more example. There was an extremely popular comic strip in the 1950s among American servicemen called Baby Son. Has anybody ever heard of Baby Son? Baby Son was a caricature of young, attractive Japanese women, usually cavorting in the comic strip with servicemen. This was primarily consumed by American servicemen, although I would assume the American expatriate community got a kick out of it too. And it portrayed Japanese women in one of two ways, either as sirens trying to suck all the money out of the American servicemen, or just this clueless, sexy babe. There was no other sort of portrayal of Japanese women. So, it's just sort of interesting to look at it. The prism of how we as Americans looked at Japanese women in those days was quite extraordinary to me. But anyway, I could just talk on like this all day, but does anybody have any questions for me or for Professor Yasutomi or for Sekine-san?
Yeah, well, I have lots of questions, but
Okay.
I will cede the floor to our guests. Yes, Anne?
I'm Japanese American third generation, and my father is Japanese American Nisei, who came to Japan as an MIS interpreter. And my parents met in the elevator of the GHQ. My dad fell in love at first sight, searched her all over Tokyo after he took her halfway home. And so I would like to see in your next version not only Japanese women who married American, Caucasian American soldiers, but also different African American soldiers, as well as Japanese American soldiers, or even Hispanic American soldiers, if there were any. And then it would be really amazing. But my question is, will we be able to buy this? how do we get hold of it?
Yeah, if anybody's interested in getting a copy of the DVD, or if you would like to see the whole film, if you came in the middle, or if you want to hear more of us talking, we have an event on the 21st. So please give me your Meishi or your address or
Okay,
something like
thank
that.
you.
And thank you for bringing up that point. Actually, the first soldiers who were allowed to bring home Japanese brides were Nisei. And Mike Masaoka, who I know is kind of reviled in
Yeah.
the Japanese-American community, he was instrumental in this. And this was sort of the thin edge of the wedge. And then after, they were saying, well, these boys are, they're Japanese anyway. Why can't they bring home brides who are of their same ethnic background? And then it kind of expanded. And a lot of white people were saying, well, I want to bring my bride home too. And they were seen as heroes in America. So it was very hard for the U.S. to refuse them. But you have to remember at the time, 30
Yeah.
American states banned
Yeah.
interracial marriage.
Exactly.
Most of it was aimed at black-white marriages, but there were a few states that singled out whites and Asians.
Yeah.
And this is another fascinating point. In the 1950s, the eugenics movement was still, they still had a lot of adherents. And for a white to marry a non-white, people assume that your children would be retarded. I mean, I'm not exaggerating.
Exactly.
It was really, this is only 70 years ago. It was really considered, it was almost like two animal species mating or something like that. So people assume, there was a Gallup poll in the 1950s that asked Americans, do you support interracial unions? And 90% or more than 90% of Americans said no. So this was really just totally beyond the pale.
Yeah. The stigma you mentioned is very strong even among the Japanese who married Japanese Americans. And all of them, as in the movie film, had the pride. So they showed what they had as Japanese women, and many of them won respect from the Japanese American communities as well as the Caucasian American communities, I believe. Yeah.
Thank you,
very
Anne.
much.
Yes. Any other questions?
They've been stupefied.
Nobody? Yes. Yes. Okay.
Okay. Okay, there is the nationwide association for Japanese American Japanese war bride in the United States, and among the members, some are black, some war brides' husbands are black, or Nisei. Many people married to Japanese American Nisei, and one thing is that the first marriage took place in Tokyo was a Japanese actress named Miura Misuko, and then her husband was a Japanese American living in Los Angeles. So many Japanese women at that time married to Japanese Americans as well.
Yeah. Well, I just want to give the floor to somebody else. Nobody. Yes. Joel.
Hi, Joël Legendre from TV5 World, married to a Japanese woman, and I'm French. My question is about how they were welcomed back in Japan. How was the atmosphere? If I look at my case, for example, my wife is very welcome in France, of course, and I'm also welcome in Japan, but it's not the same way. So could you please emphasize and tell us about how you were perceived in your Japanese families in Japan after? Thank you.
Our families are in general.
In general, or you
Okay.
too? Well, talk about you. Yeah.
Okay, Professor maybe could give the larger view. You had a whole range of situations. Some families were quite remained close to the brides, and they had a very cordial relationship. There were families that completely disowned them. There was one case, I think Professor Yasutomi told me about it, where the woman actually supported her family by going out on dates with GIs and being allowed to use the PX, and that's how she kept her family alive, actually, in the post-war period. And then when she said she was going to marry her boyfriend, they said, okay, you're dead to us. So you had a whole range of situations. Some ended in tragedy, and some were very happy. In our case, I think all of our families, everything was quite fine.
So you were accepted back in your Japanese
Yeah,
family here
yeah,
in Japan.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, my mother felt there were 4 daughters in my mother's family. One of them died shortly after the war. And, they were starving like everybody else. And my mother was kind of the black sheep and a little bit stronger than the other. This is another thing. A lot of these women, they weren't ordinary Japanese women, these women who emigrated to the States. I mean, I think they were a little bit nuts, a little bit crazy, and very, very adventurous. I mean, you had to have nerves of steel. First of all, just to get a visa. I mean, the U.S. military and the U.S. occupation made it really, really hard to get a visa to go to the States. And you had to, this is why for the Japanese American community to say that these women are prostitutes is ludicrous beyond belief. You had to provide all kinds of paperwork saying that you weren't a sex worker, that you didn't have, any kinds of diseases. The police report had to be handed in. So it would have been nearly impossible for a known prostitute to get visa to go to the States. But at any rate, in our case, just to answer your question, no, we were fine.
In many cases, there are many cases, and I have interviewed more than 200-300 Japanese war brides, met and interviewed some of them, and in many cases, their parents opposed to their marriage because why are you going to marry to ex-enemy? Or, if you married to American soldier, we will, you are not allowed to come back to Japan, to my home. And we said in Japanese, 感動する, delete your, from your family note, So, anyway, so many cases, parents opposed to it, but of course, many others also admitted to marry to American servicemen. Yeah.
From a journalistic standpoint, I'm sorry, there's so many interesting facts. From a journalistic standpoint, these women were sort of manna from heaven for the Japanese popular press as well as the American, particularly the Japanese American press, because they could just make up anything. I mean, these women go off to the States and they have tragic lives, and it sells a lot of newspapers and magazines if you trash them, and they're not in a position really to refute this. And a lot of the crap that Professor Yasutomi wrote a book about this, but a lot of the crap that was being written in Japan about these women, mostly by male Japanese journalists who did not cotton to the fact that, their women were going off and marrying, foreigners. This was repeated almost verbatim in the Japanese American press. So before these women even set foot in America, their reputations were terrible. And you might, a lot of people say, well, war brides, of course it's a negative term. And I come back and I say this particularly to Japanese audiences. The Japanese war brides were a very small subset of thousands, tens of thousands of women who married particularly from the UK, from France, even from Germany and Italy. There were large numbers of foreign nationals who married American servicemen. And if you go up to almost any of those women, they will happily raise their hand in a room full of people and say, I'm a war bride and I'm proud of it. Why is it only the Japanese community that ostracizes their own? I mean, I think it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So, yeah, anyway.
Plus, like a big city in United States, like Los Angeles, Seattle, there's a Japanese newspaper, Rafu Shimpo or this kind of newspaper, and they put the article which was put in a Japanese newspaper like Asahi Shimbun or other Japanese, and in the same tone, and they wrote that there's a pampangari, many pampans in Tokyo, and so such and such in trouble, and this kind of stuff, and also that many monthly, weekly magazines also put the article that don't marry to American servicemen. One article said don't marry to black American servicemen. Stuff like that. So many newspaper magazines and wrote these kind of articles, and these magazines are shipped to the United States, later, and then many Japanese Americans read these Japanese newspaper or magazines, and then they have some kind of idea who the Japanese war bride were. And then once they came to the United States, especially like Los Angeles, Seattle, and where the big Japanese communities are, they knew who they are, and also when they met, at the supermarket or something, they wear like a heavy makeup and palm hair. Although many Japanese Americans at that time just returned from the camp and not very, very, what shall I say? Very nice ladies and gentlemen, but still they have some idea that these these Japanese girls are very, very, stupid, or we don't allow them to enter our club and stuff. So these kind of things actually, happened among the Japanese war brides, and they want to be called senso haneme because this kind of severe experience or hard experience they experienced, they remember these kind of things. So they want to be called like the person who married to international marriage and stuff like, instead of using senso hanayome. That's the stigma. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And I've just got like 4 minutes. Is it a burning question, or you want to make a comment?
Concerning the stigma, I think that became a little bit less horrendous after the Empress came and addressed all the war brides somewhere in California. We're from Seattle, but many war brides gathered, and the Empress really showed respect. And that sort of changed a lot of the negative views of Japanese war brides after that. But I can't remember exactly the date.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Exactly
much.
what you mentioned, especially Empress Michiko gave a very warm words to Japanese war bride. And once he invited the palace to the president of Japanese War Bride Club, and then met, and then the president wrote a newsletter how it was, and then also we don't need to be ashamed of being called senso hanayome because Michiko-sama, Empress, admitted us, recognized us, so don't be ashamed of it. Just go straight. And that's why in 2009, there's a JICA project and also exhibition in Yokohama, JICA Yokohama Museum. And then Empress came to see, the Japanese war brides, exhibitions, not only Japanese war bride, but other picture brides and stuff. And also, anyway, Japanese royal family are very much concerned about the Japanese overseas, not only in Japanese and in the United States, but especially South Americans and other countries. And these Japanese war brides are 80s years old almost, and they have old days education, and they have a very they respect the royal family, and if the words that were given from the emperor or empress encouraged them very much. So yeah, yes. That's why the 2 TV program broadcasted this year. One is Nihon Terebi, that talk about Empress Michiko and war bride, secret, friendship and stuff like that. And this month, December 19th, from Fuji TV, that start from 2 o'clock to 3:30, 1 hour and a half. It also broadcasts the secret story of Empress Michiko and war bride. And it's a good idea to have a look at it. Yes.
Well, I'll have to close because we have to give up the room
Well,
at 4 o'clock.
so
But I
sorry.
just want to thank Lucy. It was wonderful. For me, the film, what I liked best was it was so real. I mean, I loved your exchange with your mother. For example, I mean, even though I'm not Japanese or, it's more universal than just restricting it to Japan, I feel. And also you get so many Asian brides now in Japan. So it's a kind of similar background. And I thank you very much for coming. And Lucy, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor.